Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I try to realistically color birds using Papertrey Ink's Feathered Friends number 7. For this project, my inspiration is a colorful hummingbird. I first started off by die cutting the bird on some 110-pound cardstock. I prefer to color these birds using colored pencils as the color doesn't fill the score lines and the details are still visible. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the case with alcohol markers and I'm yet to achieve the same level of detail while using them. I'm using Prismacolors for my project, but any colored pencils will do the trick. When I'm looking for some good quality, cheap colored pencils, I usually go for Faber-Castell Classic pencils that are available at pretty much every single stationery store for less than $10. I usually start off by using the darker colored pencil and then slowly fill in the rest of the die cut using lighter shades. Once I'm done with the die cut, you will notice that I sometimes like to go over the top again with the darker shade just to add a little outline or a shadow to the scored lines and make them more visible. In case I'm unable to blend the colors, I occasionally pull out my colorless blender as well. A lot of people use a paper stump, but I prefer to use the colorless blender pencil as it's easy to hold and it's also quite easy to sharpen. I'm going to skip the part where I colored the tail as I didn't like how it turned out, so I tried to cover it up towards the end of the video. Once I finished coloring and was happy with the result, I stuck all the parts together using glue. For one of the wings, I decided to add some foam so that it pops out and looks three-dimensional. I then colored the feet, beak and eye using alcohol markers and stuck them as well. Lastly, as always, I finished off my bird by adding additional details and highlights using a white gel pen. In general, for my watercolor backgrounds, I tend to use Karen brush markers as I find them vibrant. I'm also using some cheap watercolor paper that I got at Michael's for about $5. So with this brush markers, I don't have to add additional layers of color that might result in my paper tearing up or piling. Feel free to use any paint or paper that you're comfortable with. So for this background, I simply wet the paper first and added some paint in random places. I honestly made no plans on where each color should go, as I don't think there's a right way of doing this. So just have fun while you're doing it. Also, just make sure that you don't add too much water or your paint might mix together and create muddy colors, and we don't want that. As I've said before, I wasn't happy with my initial tail, so I went ahead and die cut the tail once again. While coloring, just make sure that the end of the tail matches the body once it's attached. We don't want anyone finding out that we performed plastic surgery on the bird. Once I was happy with the final result, I simply stuck the tail on top of the original one. For my card base, I stuck my watercolor panel on top of an A2 size linen cardstock. I wanted a subtle background for my card, so I decided to shop my stash and use sheet music background from the Songbirds stamp set released all the way back in 2014. I simply stamped the images using Versamark and heat embossed it using white embossing powder. For my sentiment, I used the Bold and Beautiful stamp set. I used both pink and orange to stamp the sentiment so that I get an ombre look. I love mixing new products with older ones as it increases the number of ways in which you can stretch your supplies. Once I was happy with it, I simply stuck the bird and the sentiment on my card base. And that's it, you're done. I hope this video showed you a simple and easy way to create watercolor backgrounds and also a way to color these die-cut birds realistically. Now for some bloopers. I've already shared how I try to cover up the tail of the bird. Now after adhering all the elements, I realized some stray marks, so I just used some white paint to cover it up as it is already a watercolor background. Later on, I also added some clear Nuvo drops after I finished making the video, and that also did the trick. So now this is a small clip of me struggling to figure out the best way to place the sentiment and the bird on the background. I really wanted to use the keeping you in my thoughts sentiment from the stamp set, but I just couldn't find the best way to place it without hiding the musical notes. In the end, I kinda gave up and just ended up using a smaller sentiment, which I think still looks good, but just not the one I wanted to use. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I hope this video was useful.